decarbonized oil. That doesn't exist, obviously. That is a gross contradiction.
Big energy projects, boom or bust. What are we going to see here in Canada? Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we got an interview with Rosemary Barton and Tim Hodgson talking about green hydrogen, carbon capture. I've got other clips to contradict this interview to show you how stupid it is, because we've got a chemical engineer with 35 years of experience who debunks green hydrogen. On top of that, we got a handful of other stories. Let's jump into this. Yesterday, there was a parade in America for their 250th anniversary, as well as Donald Trump's birthday. And now there's people protesting across Canada against Donald Trump in places like Ottawa, when Donald Trump is going to be in Kananaskis. Protesting him in Ottawa seems silly, but...
Well, if I can be honest, I'm terrified. I'm up here, I'm safe for now. But I feel like a lot of people in the U.S. understand that what's happening in the United States right now is very similar to what was happening in Germany in the 1930s.
As a dual citizen, I am extremely concerned that the country that I lived in for most of my life is under a dictatorship. And my concern is that he will take over Canada.
These people are so extreme. Donald Trump's not going to come steal our water and steal our land and steal everything.
Canadian protest organizers say peaceful, no tyrant rallies are being held in solidarity with the U.S. protests and in reaction to the Trump administration that has cracked down on free speech, detained people for their political views, and threats to deport American citizens with military force. Now, today,
these protesters think Donald Trump's going to come round up Canadians, and it is nutty. That's not what's going to happen. Now, it is possible and seems likely he's using economic force to gain access to our critical resources, our oil and gas, critical minerals at a bargain barrel price, but he's not going to just round up and capture people and send his goons all across Canada, capturing people with nets. Big, bad, scary Donald Trump. It's ridiculous. These people are being goofy. Embarrassing crowd. Why protest in Canada? Exactly. How ridiculous. We need to pay attention to local governments, as this is where things happen that directly affect citizens. Talking about Trump, who is thousands of hours away, is ridiculous. Why are they protesting a leader of a different country? This one right here, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, ever. Next up, we got this on Parliament Hill. I like the quote here from Chris Stacey. A whole bunch of question marks. Why are all these Khalistanis standing on Parliament Hill? Why? Well, the bright side, at least they're not chanting for the end of Modi right now. Chris Stacey has other clips, I can't show them, but a bunch of these guys are standing here on Parliament Hill with religious pokey pokes, swords, other pokey pokes. Chris Stacey confronted the police and said, why are these guys walking around with swords hanging from their belts? They're allowed because they're religious. Isn't that ridiculous? They don't allow hockey sticks or flag poles, but they can walk around with swords. Our country is stupid. They are mad Modi is coming to town. Yeah, they are mad. I'm surprised they don't have their little jail set up there that they usually put on those trucks, chanting for his end. Next up, we got this interview here from Tim Hodgson, Rosemary Barton on CBC. He says quite a bit here. This guy's going to double and triple down on Mark Carney's agenda, net zero, so they can all get rich off of this.
It will need to honor our obligations to climate change.
You've talked about a grand bargain to describe what will happen with the country in Alberta, as has the Premier of Alberta. What does that mean? That we're going to get more pipelines, but only if we deal with climate change? What's the bargain?
In Saskatoon, we spent quite a bit of time talking about two particular examples that bubbled up from the premiers. One was the Western Infrastructure Corridor, which they're now calling port to port to port, or the Western Arctic Corridor, and then the Eastern Energy Partnership. If you look at both of those initiatives in those corridors, you would see many, many types of infrastructure. You would see ports, you would see roads, you would see railways, you would see transmission lines. On the East Coast, you might see offshore wind.
Right.
Offshore wind, huh? That green hydrogen. Let's just jump into that for a few minutes here. It's time to crack this nut open. So what exactly is green hydrogen? We hear Mark Carney's Minister of Energy, Tim Hodgson, speak about, as well as Premier Tim Houston of Nova Scotia. Well, green hydrogen, I've already mentioned it multiple times. It's a scam. We've got a chemical engineer here in this video, Paul Martin. This guy with Spitfire Research, been a chemical engineer for 35 years. He breaks down exactly what this is, the nuts and bolts of it. In this first clip, he's going to talk about energy loss, gas, green hydrogen is incredibly inefficient. Before we get into the first one here, let's just break down what is green, blue, gray, and black hydrogen. So green hydrogen is hydrogen used with renewable energy. And this is what Brookfield wants. What happens here is they have to use solar, wind, that kind of energy. And when that energy isn't being pulled from the grid, the excess energy doesn't get used. Now, if they build these wind farms, there'll always be a demand for green energy. Considering that's a part of Brookfield's portfolio, this would make them more money, and then thus make Mark Carney more money. So breaking this down, green hydrogen is made from renewables, blue hydrogen is made from natural gas with carbon capture, and gray or black hydrogen is made from natural gas with no carbon capture. Black is the dirtiest, blue is middle of the road, and green is the cleanest. But green takes the most amount of energy, which comes from wind and solar. With that in mind, hydrogen energy is incredibly inefficient. It shouldn't be used for electric vehicles or for anything else, really. There's a few specific cases where this would make sense to have hydrogen energy as a source of power. Just listen to what Paul Martin has to say about its efficiencies here.
And you can see the losses there are quite substantial. So we lose 30% of the energy on making hydrogen, then we lose between 10 and 40% more making it into something else or compressing it for storage, and then we lose another 40 to 50% feeding into a fuel cell or a turbine. And the very best case, when you take the most optimistic figures there and multiply them by one another, you get 37% efficiency. The answer there is, conclusion is really clear that hydrogen is really terrible battery.
So green hydrogen, terrible for batteries, terrible for power in general, because it's incredibly inefficient, 37%. This next segment here, he talks about how green hydrogen only accounts for 1%. 99% of hydrogen is created from fossil fuels, meaning that Tim Houston and Mark Carney and Tim Hodgson wanted to invest in this green hydrogen off the coast of Nova Scotia. This is another pipe dream. This is just like the EVs, all the companies they invested in that have all gone broke. This is another pipe dream. We have resources in the ground. We have trillions of dollars we can make money from, and yet they want to go chasing this because Brookfield can make money off of it.
Basically all of it, 99-ish% of it is made from fossils without carbon capture, which makes it actually more emissive when used as a fuel than if you just burned gas itself. A lot of it is made from petroleum and used in petroleum refining, meaning that those two sources and uses almost balance. A little bit is made as a byproduct of making things like bleach and sodium hydroxide in the chlor-alkali process. And some of that.
So you hear that? He's basically saying because it's less efficient, it's worse for the environment to use hydrogen. What happens if Mark Carney starts giving billions of dollars over to Nova Scotia to build windmills out in the ocean, chasing another fantastical energy source that won't work out? This is another disaster waiting to happen.
Might see onshore wind that delivers clean hydrogen to Europe. There's a number of these. What we talked about was putting those together in combinations, which are a net benefit to Canada. One of them is obviously carbon capture and carbon sequestration. One of the things that was talked about was if we were going to move forward with a pipeline, it would be done in conjunction with a major effort around carbon sequestration.
And that's because they can make money off that because Brookfield dominates that industry. And these guys are all a bunch of greedy schmucks who don't care about Canadians, only care about the bottom line, how much money they pull into their own bank accounts. You don't have to trust me. It's all on the board here. Everything's backed with sources. Mark Carney, board member of Stripe founding member of the Frontier Group. Frontier Group got $1 billion from Alphabet, Shopify, Meta, and McKinsey to create this carbon credit market, essentially providing money up front so they don't go bust. And these carbon credits get created into low integrity and high integrity removals. What Brookfield would be targeting here is these high integrity, direct air capture, all these kind of things that the average person couldn't do. These generate high value carbon credits, which get sold to companies like oil companies who then can say they have green oil. Their oil is not any different. They just paid someone to say that their oil is better now because they paid for someone else to pull CO2 out of the air. This is all a big scam. And on the back end of it, you've got all these guys like Mark Carney, Michael Moritz, who used to be former partner of Sequoia Capital, all investing money into Stripe being at the epicenter of this, as well as other people all invested in Stripe into carbon capture to create a market that if they can get everyone on board, then the company who has the biggest foothold in carbon capture, Brookfield, would make the most amount of money off of it. And who's got stock options in Brookfield and probably a whole bunch of stocks? It's Mark Carney. In this next clip, he's going to explain how much energy it's going to take to create green hydrogen.
Well, if we just do simple math, we use a very optimistic 50 kilowatt hours per kilogram for electrical generation of hydrogen from water, and we have to replace 90 million tons a year of this stuff, we come up with needing 4,500 terawatt hours of electricity. And if we had electricity to feed those electrolyzers 24/7, that would be 513 gigawatts of electrolyzers running at 100% capacity factor. And you can see that, in the world in 2019, we only made 2,100 terawatt hours of wind and solar on the entire Earth. Now that's growing by leaps and bounds year over year, but still we need twice as much energy and then some as we made in 2019 from wind and solar in order to just replace the hydrogen that we're going to need post-decarbonization. So this is a massive problem just to green the existing hydrogen supply. So it is a bit of a puzzle as to why people would be pitching the notion of using it in inefficient uses like heating or transport.
If there's no puzzle here, it's because companies will make money from this. That's all this is. So as he shows here, they need 4,500 terawatt hours to transition all the hydrogen to green hydrogen, but the world only produces 2,100 terawatt hours, less than half. The more demand for green hydrogen in Canada means the more demand for power, green, clean power that Brookfield produces. Brookfield has projects all over the world like this one. Brookfield Renewable launches 200 million green hybrid bonds to fund ESG projects. It says here, green financing strategy for its global renewable portfolio, which spans hydroelectric, wind power, emerging sustainable solutions like carbon capture. The company operates over 35,000 megawatts of capacity with development pipeline of 200,000 megawatts. We've got this one here, the Granite Reliable Wind Farm. This one is in the United States, owned by Brookfield Renewable right there. We've got Prince Township Wind Farm. This one also a subsidiary of Brookfield Power. So essentially, if Mark Carney puts money towards this, putting up windmills in the Atlantic, this is just creating demand for Brookfield to make money off of it, and doing so in a very inefficient way.
The other thing that we can conclude is that there basically is no meaningful quantity of green hydrogen. This is hydrogen made by electrolysis of water using wind and solar on Earth right now, because almost all of that 2,100 terawatt hours is used for things other than running electrolyzers. The other thing is, of course, that wind and solar don't operate at those high capacity factors. So this 500 gigawatts of electrolyzers is actually closer to 1,500 gigawatts of electrolyzers in reality. And the cost of that is absolutely crushing. So the notion that we're going to have excess green hydrogen to waste in inefficient uses is a little premature, like, say, by decades and decades.
There you have it, from a chemical engineer with 35 years of experience.
We might wonder what this might cost us. And if you do the math on that, take our 50 kilowatt hours per kilogram, which, by the way, is next to impossible to be that efficient. But if you were to do that and you had 3 cents per kilowatt hour electricity, you could make hydrogen for $1.50 a kilogram, but only if you found the electrolyzer lying in the ditch somewhere, if it was free. And in reality, we have to pay capital cost and other operating costs to run an electrolyzer and compressors and all those other things. So already this cost of $1.50 a kilogram, which is kind of the reference cost of wholesale black hydrogen made from natural gas with no carbon capture, is going to take some very cheap electricity and also some very cheap electrolyzers. The reality is electrolyzers right now are too expensive to make hydrogen part-time.
And finally, we've got a segment here on blue hydrogen. He talks about converting this, carbon capture. This also isn't the holy grail.
This stuff's easy to capture. This stuff is economically next to impossible to capture. And the capture costs a fortune because you need more energy, electricity and heat in order to run the capture equipment. And so we have a project that does exactly this. It takes a steam methane reformer and it captures about 80% of this easy portion, which is about 45% of the total, and buries it to the tune of 1 million tons of CO2 per year. It's called Shell Quest. It's in Alberta. It's on the Scotford Upgrader. But by the time you take into account the extra natural gas that has to be burned to make heat and electricity in order to run the compressors and the capture equipment, the net capture drops from 45% to 35%. The other problem is that we've got methane leakage, both here at the front end and then associated with making this other energy here. And if you take that into account, it drops the CO2 equivalent capture from 35% to 21%. By the way, this plant cost $1 billion of Canadian taxpayers' money, both Alberta and federal money, and it costs $50 million a year to run. And the most recent capture cost for 2021 was about $145 per ton of CO2 emissions averted. So that forgets about the equivalent, the methane emissions, that just ignores those and pretends that they're not there. It's costing $145 a ton to bury, just to capture and bury that little bit of CO2, the easy bit.
This is just preposterous. What a waste of money.
Really what you're getting here is blackish blue and bruised colored hydrogen at best.
This whole thing is just a money-making scam. That's what this is. They want more demand. They're creating more demand than offering the solution to meet that demand. And taxpayers are funding this along the way. Instead of just building some pipelines, pulling out some natural gas and oil and selling it to other countries around the world that want it. We could get rich in a few years if we just did that. They should be doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on getting new pipeline, new LNG to Prince Rupert and shipping this over to Asia ASAP. It should be all hands on deck. That's what should be happening in our country right now. Let's just do a quick update here on how much Mark Carney has made since becoming Prime Minister. Once again, there's his name highlighted in orange over there. And if we go here, here's his stock options. So he's got 300,000 shares at a strike price of $35.13 and 200,000 shares at $40 strike price. Back in December, they calculated his value here at $6.8 million US dollars. That's just the profit. Taking the total value minusing the strike price, you'd end up with $6.8 million. Today, that number is based off of $59.16 at Brookfield's trading price in US dollars. His options would be worth $8.8 million. If you minus that off of 6.8, the old value back in December, Mark Carney's up $2,533,587 US since he's become Prime Minister. He's already made $2.5 million just talking about projects that are most likely are going to enrich Brookfield. And converted to Canadian dollars, Mark Carney has made $3.471 million, so $3.4, almost $3.5 million since becoming Prime Minister, just from stock option value going up in Brookfield. Just imagine what happens when he starts dishing out all this money and projects to Brookfield on modular housing, green energy, wind, solar, you name it. This is all a big money-making scam.
The Pathways Alliance is something that has been put forward by the 6 large proponents. Yep. It would significantly decarbonize the oil sands. That would be an important part of this process.
One of the things that the Prime Minister said and others have said is decarbonized oil. That doesn't exist, obviously. That is a gross contradiction. Oil contains carbon. So what are we supposed to understand by that? So
look, the carbon the Canadian industry has been incredibly innovative. It has used technology over the years to reduce its carbon footprint. Sure. I have watched the carbon intensity of a barrel of oil from Canada has been going down and down and down. The Pathways Initiative would significantly reduce the carbon footprint from the oil sands as much as 30%.
Why? Why would we do that when China is opening up a new coal-fired power plant every week? It's because you guys want to get rich off those carbon credits and Brookfield stock. We're not stupid, guys. I already showed in that previous report from WWF, we're already carbon neutral. Canada's already carbon neutral, guys. We have so many peatlands and bogs and trees and forests and marshlands that suck up all our carbon. We have tons of money in the ground. We just need to ship it around the world. These guys want to decarbonize oil because they'll get rich off of it.
That is a big positive step forward.
So that's how you define decarbonized oil.
It is applying new technologies to reduce the carbon footprint of each barrel of oil.
One of the
That's absurd. I just showed you guys a 35-year Chemist proving that it's nearly impossible. It wastes a ton of energy. It's not efficient. It's an absolutely stupid thing to go after.
Problems with the Pathways Alliance, though, as you know, is that it has been kind of at a standstill for many years, really. And a recent study says that it would be very hard for it to even break even, that it is probably not going to be sustainable if there is no government funding behind it. Is that something the government would be willing to get involved in order to reach these goals?
I think the government has said in particular situations where there is support from other governments, like provinces, we are prepared to put money to work to catalyze things. I'll use the example of LNG, because I think that's a success story that Canadians don't really understand. We had no LNG industry 5 years ago. with the support of the provincial government in British Columbia and the federal government, we put roughly $1 billion to work. There's been almost $60 billion of private sector investment, much of it resulting in Indigenous ownership.
Why does that matter? There's 5% Indigenous in this country. These guys never talk about Canadians and Canadian prosperity. It's always about Indigenous or LGBTQ. The rest of Canada always gets dropped off on the wayside. When is enough here, guys? This guy's such a freeloader. Freeloading off of Mark Carney's agenda. He doesn't care. As long as he gets rich. He knows how he talks the same way. We put $1 billion to work. Catalyze.
To build an LNG business in British Columbia that produces the cleanest LNG in the world. That is a win for Canada.
It's not a win that you guys don't want to build any more of these projects. It's not a win that these projects aren't getting built. They haven't been getting built for 10 years. And now they want to do them only if they can put Brookfield in the middle of all of it.
That is a win for everybody.
Speaking of British Columbia, they are not interested in any further pipelines going to the West Coast. If a province says we don't want this, is this dead on arrival, these ideas that the Premier of Alberta has?
That's not true. It's not British Columbians, it's David Eby. David Eby does not represent British Columbians. He needs to be thrown out of office because he's a radical loser.
So I think what we heard when we were in Saskatoon is that we're looking at a totality of what happens. I think if there is a hypothetical oil pipeline with nothing else, we've heard the answer. There's a whole bunch of things that can be done.
Ways to convince them to do it. Is that what you mean?
There are all kinds of things what I saw was all of the premiers coming together saying, hey, if we all work together, we all do things that help.
Premier Eby wasn't there, so I'm not sure that's the case for him.
his deputy premier was there. And I'm not going to speak for the Prime Minister or the Premier of British Columbia, but I think they talk fairly regularly.
So you don't think that a no from BC is an actual no? That there's possibilities there?
We're talking about a hypothetical project.
Sure, but the idea, all of them are hypothetical.
Yeah, they're all hypothetical. Come on. David Eby blocking this, he just keeps dancing around. He's like, oh, yeah, maybe later. Yeah, maybe later. David Eby needs to be tossed out of office immediately.
Or most of them are hypothetical.
What I heard in Saskatoon was everyone saying, let's look at real projects with real proponents. Let's figure out what the end goal is, and let's find a way to get there.
Okay, I'll end on this. Pierre Poilievre, Daniel Smith, they both say if you really want to get projects done, and I imagine they're talking mostly about oil and gas, you've got to get rid of the cap on oil and gas emissions. You've got to get rid of the industrial carbon price. You've got to get rid of C69. Are any of those pieces on the table, or are you trying to operate within the confines of those things? What
the Major Projects Office will do is define a set of criteria about what needs to happen for a project to move forward. A result. We will then figure out how we get there within the construct. At the same time, we are going to be looking at what we learn about how we could adjust legislation in a way that honors our commitment to climate change and honors our commitment to consultation. I don't think it's realistic to rip up our Environmental Protection Act, to rip up the act that dictates Indigenous consultation.
This guy's unbelievable. On our commitment to climate change, you guys have been exposed for ripping off Canadians for years now with that stupid carbon tax, which did nothing for the climate. Just stealing money from Canadians, but lying about it. As I showed the WWF report, we're already carbon neutral. We don't need to do any of these stupid things. We can have some basic stuff in place, obviously affecting quality of life for people living in areas around factories or any sort of facilities that are near towns and cities. If it affects air quality, obviously we want to have some environmental things in place. But I mean, these guys want to go so overboard because that's where Brookfield has got all their chips lined up. Once again, they're not in this for Canada. They're in it for themselves.
People have tried that before. It results in nothing getting built and we just spend time in court. What we need to do is have a process where we can talk about particular projects, lay out clear conditions for them moving forward so that the private sector has certainty about what they do if they're going to commit capital.
Yep.
And then we move forward and then we build.
Minister, I hope you'll come back. We'll have
This guy's an absolute disaster. He's Mark Carney's little right-hand man. He'll do whatever Carney says. He sounds, he walks and talks just like Mark Carney. Do we have a budget or just making it up? Meanwhile, in Canada, lost Liberal decade. Buddy's hair looks fake AF. Just one concrete accomplishment, please. Yeah, they have none. They won't have any. It's too late. Alaska LNG will get built before Canada can get anything done.